This episode contains discussions about provider sexual misconduct and may be inappropriate for some listeners. Please use discretion. What comes to mind when you hear the phrase sexual misconduct? You've probably seen headlines depicting vicious sexual crimes that may paint a picture for you. But what about the steamy physician-patient romances from your favorite hospital dramas, like Grey's Anatomy? Is that a part of your definition? It's very likely, but the medical board's definition of sexual misconduct is much broader than what you had in mind. Let's dig a little deeper today and find out. You're listening to MedBoard Pulse, a podcast by the State Medical Board of Ohio. I'm your host, Jerica Stewart, Chief of Communications. Let's talk, Ohio. Welcome back. We have some weighty subject matter today, but information that's important for you to know as a patient. When cases involving sexual misconduct surface, the stakes are incredibly high and the patient and witness testimony is critical. Remember, the medical board does not practice criminal law and can't send someone to prison, nor can it award a victim compensation for the pain caused. The board is solely responsible for the license that grants the practitioner the ability to freely practice anywhere in the state. That's the danger in allowing predators to slip through the cracks. If the board isn't informed, the provider may simply find a new place to practice if they're disrupted, further prolonging the problem. So how do you clearly identify behavior as sexual misconduct in a healthcare setting? Well, in Ohio, we've created administrative rules with distinct definitions to help provide some guidance. Let's recap from our conversation with our Executive Director, Stephanie Luca. Administrative rules amplify and implement provisions of the Ohio Revised Code, and once adopted, have the full force and effect of law. Before they go into effect, the board members vote on them, which kicks off a formal rulemaking process that includes review by multiple state entities, public comment, and sometimes revisions. But again, once they are formally adopted, medical board licensees are required to follow them when they practice in Ohio. In this case, the sexual misconduct rules were adopted in 2006 and are located in the Ohio Administrative Code 4731-26. You can look that up right now by going to codes.ohio.gov. What's always been interesting to me is the specificity of the definition. For instance, the rule makes sure to call out who is considered to be a patient or a key third party. It also defines sexual misconduct as conduct that exploits the licensee-patient relationship in a sexual way, whether verbal or physical, and may include the expression of thoughts, feelings, or gestures that are sexual or that reasonably may be construed by a patient as sexual. Sexual misconduct includes sexual impropriety, sexual contact, or sexual interaction. I won't read this whole section of the rule for you, but I do think it's important to understand the different tiers of misconduct. First is sexual impropriety, which is conduct by the licensee that is seductive, sexually suggestive, disrespectful of patient privacy, or sexually demeaning to a patient. So for example, if you're having an exam performed that requires you to remove some of your clothing, your provider should not be present in the room while you disrobe and should use proper draping practices to respect your privacy during the exam. They should not make comments that aren't clinically related to your care about your body or sexuality, and despite your favorite soap opera, your provider is never allowed to ask you out on a date and engage in conversations about sexual fantasies. That should not happen. Your provider should also offer a third person or chaperone in the room if you have an intimate examination. Chaperones are a good practice to protect you as a patient and the provider from accusations. The next definition is sexual contact. This is really related to the physical contact the provider may have with the patient. For example, touching a breast or body part that has a sexual connotation in a way that is not a part of the appropriate health care, or when a patient has refused or withdrawn consent. And finally, we've arrived at the most egregious type of misconduct, sexual interaction. It is exactly what it sounds like. The rule is explicit here, so I won't get into the weeds and start listing body parts, but know that having sex of any kind with the patient, whether or not it is consensual, is absolutely prohibited. And guess what? So is kissing or exchanging healthcare services for drugs or sexual favors or performing an intimate exam without a justification. You can read the full rule in detail yourself to get a better understanding. We'll provide a link to the Ohio Administrative Code in the episode details. So we have rules that define the misconduct, but the board has taken further steps to ensure that cases involving sexual misconduct are given the attention they need. In fact, over the last 5 years or so, the medical board has constructed new policies, procedures, and a dedicated unit to better handle sexual misconduct complaints. Today I'll be speaking with the chief of our sexual misconduct unit as she explains the many ways in which the board thoughtfully guides these complaints through the process. But before we dive in, we'll take a brief break to hear from Dr. Arneal. Stay tuned. And now we've gotten to the part of the show where we hear from Dr. O'Neill in our Medical Minute.
Good morning, Jerica.
Good morning, Dr. O'Neill. Thank you for joining us again today.
I'm very happy to be here. Before we begin our discussion, I do want to make a couple of disclosures. As new studies are published, information in medicine continues to evolve, and statements or answers that are made today may be different in the future. And also, I want to make everyone aware that these podcasts are to raise awareness. And if you have questions, please speak with your physician or your healthcare provider.
What are we talking about today?
So now that summer has arrived, the question comes up whether symptoms are secondary to a summer cold or do I just have allergies? And we get a lot of questions regarding this. And it's important to know that some symptoms are similar, but some are different. But one important thing I want to highlight, and I know you have a lot of questions, is the American College of Allergy, Immunology, and Asthma really want people to know that allergies do not cause a fever. So if you have symptoms that you think are allergic in nature, but you develop a fever, something else is typically going on. So,
Absolutely. And I think that is one of the hardest things. I imagine, folks with kids too are always like, well, what should I be concerned about? Is this just a normal cold? Is this an allergy reaction? Is it something more serious? So if someone has a cough, what does that mean? Does that have some kind of distinction?
sure, I mean, both allergies and colds, you can have a cough. However, with allergies, typically the cough is a dry cough. With a cold, you typically have a hacking, wet type of cough. So it's different. You may have a cough, but they're typically different.
I know sometimes, if I don't get enough sleep, I'll have dark circles under my eyes, but, hopefully I look okay most days. What about if someone does have that kind of ring or that darkness under their eyes?
Sure, this occurs typically with allergies, and it should never really happen with a cold. So if you have dark circles under the eyes, typically it's caused by an allergy.
Okay, I hate this one. What about muscle pain or body aches? Oh, that's the worst feeling when you know you're getting sick and you can feel that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Allergies typically may cause some tiredness, but no really body aches or muscle pain. Colds can.
And then, so there's some symptoms that overlap as well, right?
Sure. Sneezing, excuse me, a runny or stuffy nose, headaches, tiredness, they overlap. Could be either.
When would I expect an allergy to occur?
It depends on the season where things are pollinating or things that you're allergic to. For example, if you have a tree allergy, then symptoms start usually in early spring when the trees start pollinating or blooming. If you have a grass pollen allergy, typically symptoms occur late spring to early summer. When we get into the hot summer months, such as July here in Ohio, it's hot, it's dry, we don't have much rain. Typically, allergy sufferers, have a reprieve. Without the rain, mold spores are low, trees and grasses are not pollinating, so people feel much better. However, once school starts, coming into the fall, then the weeds start pollinating and allergy symptoms recur.
So we're basically never safe, especially in Ohio. It's always coming back for us.
It is happening time and time again.
How long should I expect an allergy symptom to last?
Sure. To put it in perspective, a cold usually lasts about a week, but allergy symptoms can last several weeks or through that season where the trees or grasses or whatever you're allergic to is occurring.
Okay. And then how would you go about treating an allergy?
Sure, it depends on the allergy, but some treatments that people consider are antihistamines, nasal corticosteroid to reduce inflammation in the nose, immunotherapy such as allergy injections or allergy shots. Um, Things that you can do yourself is to stay indoors when the pollen counts are high, or if you're outside, wear a face mask, wear sunglasses, try to protect yourself against that, and regularly cleaning to keep dust, mold, those type of things low as possible.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your time today, Dr. O'Neill. I do hope that this is something that's going to help people going into the rest of the year. Every season we know has some traps apparently, but at least we can better navigate that. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Happy to be here.
In today's episode, we are covering the heavy topic of sexual misconduct. One of the ways we've learned to be more effective in our approach is by having dedicated resources to process and handle these cases as they make their way through the board's departments. Joining me today is attorney and chief of our sexual misconduct unit, Rachel Lang. Rachel, thank you for taking time with me today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I went to law school at The Ohio State University, Moritz College of Law, and it was there that I became interested in criminal law, specifically sexual offenses. I have spent the majority of my career as a criminal prosecutor, handling felonies and sex offenses. I then went to the Ohio Attorney General's office in their healthcare fraud section, where I spent about 2.5 years prosecuting Medicaid provider fraud and some patient abuse cases. And I have been at the State Medical Board of Ohio, handling only sexual misconduct cases here.
It's been not a slow time for you here, huh? We've had a lot.
No, jumped right in and started swimming.
I have some questions for you that I'm going to ask. We really want to hear from you and hear your expertise. So my first question is, can you please explain what type of staff are a part of the sexual misconduct unit and the purpose it really serves at the medical board?
Sure, Jerica. So the sexual misconduct unit here in Ohio is comprised of 4 specialized investigators, and they're divided by region. And so we have 1 in the West, 1 in Central, and 2 in the East. And they're specially trained and full-time investigators dedicated only to sexual misconduct complaints. We also have a victim coordinator who's a full-time trained victim advocate, and 3 part-time advocates to assist her as well. And I serve as a chief of the unit, so there is a dedicated full-time enforcement attorney. We also have additional support with a unit paralegal.
Wow, so investigators, a paralegal, an attorney, victim coordinators, these are all important roles, and I know the board has worked really hard to put the right people in the right place to make sure that team is secure. You are the chief of our sexual misconduct unit. How long has that existed here at the medical board?
So the origin story of the sexual misconduct unit here began back in around 2019 when the medical board began to review 25 years of past sexual misconduct cases that had been closed. And that work looked like monthly subcommittee meetings, hiring 20 external reviewers to examine these cases, specialized trainings within the board. That's where we realized that a victim advocate was really an essential part of the team. And this was all going alongside of the Richard Strauss investigation and the working report that the working group that Governor DeWine created. And in March of 21, Governor DeWine's closing report of that working group came out with recommendations, and it became an agency priority to create a standalone unit to address these sexual misconduct cases because they are so different. So in July of 21, a dedicated lead attorney was hired for the first time here to address these cases, and the unit began to function in its initial stages. Also during this time, specific internal protocols were developed for how to investigate sexual misconduct cases, how to interact with law enforcement, when and how to refer. And it was this is when this became, I think, fair to say in this time period, just a tremendous priority of the board. So now we are a standalone unit, more like a strike force model, which is something that I was a part of at the Attorney General's office as well in healthcare fraud, where the investigators and the attorneys are working together from the outset of a case, which can really strengthen how that case is investigated and how it moves forward.
Can you explain more about the role of the victim coordinator specifically?
So the victim coordinator here at the sexual misconduct unit she's a trained investigator who has gone through additional training as a victim advocate. And she comes alongside the investigators to provide support to the victim in the interviews, just in notifications, helping the victim connect with resources, and then stays alongside that individual all the way through the process so that we have real consistency of care, and so that support can go all the way through the hearing process.
So in the past, I know I've spoken with a victim coordinator and heard some of the stories about the impact on patients when they're going through situations like this and having to tell their stories about sexual misconduct. What are some of the unique challenges for these types of cases? Because I know they're so sensitive and it's difficult oftentimes to bring them before the board.
So sexual misconduct cases are very similar to the cases I used to handle in my old life as a prosecutor. And so when you're dealing with sexual assault, there are some similarities that happen and unique challenges moving these cases forward. So the nature of these cases are that they're by nature private. So it isn't common that you're going to have anybody else in the room except for the offender and the victim. There are also many barriers to disclosure, completely understandable reasons why a victim might not want to come forward. It's embarrassing. There is a fear of not being believed. Often the person who did it is a respected member of the community. There can be self-blame, like, I should have said something, I should have done something, or self-doubt. Maybe it didn't happen that way, just giving the other person the benefit of the doubt instead of themselves. Additionally, sometimes this can really compound past trauma, something that might have happened to that person earlier in their lives that can make coming forward now really difficult. And the process is time consuming. So if something happens to you at a doctor's appointment or a licensed massage therapy appointment, it can be time consuming to come forward with not a lot of reward. There's nothing that you're going to get out of it except doing the right thing. And a lot of times the patient or the victim wants to put it behind them. They might be concerned about privacy. And then there are additional barriers for male victims, and there can be barriers culturally where it's just not something that is spoken of. And so that's where we can have, first of all, the victim coordinator can really come alongside and provide support. And then also additionally having a trained enforcement attorney and investigators who are aware of those very basic and typical disclosure issues.
In pretty much every courtroom drama I've seen, there's a big scene with an emphasis that the defendant must be found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. I'm sure you're familiar with this language as an attorney, but that's not really the case at the board, right? You talked about it oftentimes there being kind of the patient's word versus the provider's word and not usually having many witnesses. What does the board really have to prove in order to move a case forward for discipline?
I'm really glad you brought that up because that is what everybody thinks of when they think of these cases. They think of Law and Order or whatever courtroom drama. And that is that's going to be the criminal arena, and we are not in the criminal arena. So in the courtroom drama, the state has to prove the offense beyond a reasonable doubt, and we've heard that thrown around, and that it means proof not beyond all doubt, but beyond all reasonable doubt. And in the administrative arena, which is where we are here, dealing with the licenses of our licensees here in the state of Ohio, our standard is preponderance of the evidence. And so that means more likely than not. So preponderance is a standard that we move forward with. And if you can think of it as two stacks of paper, like two absolutely even stacks of paper that you're going to put into your printer, the same height, the exact same number of sheets, if you add one more sheet to one of those stacks, now that stack has a preponderance of the evidence. It's just more likely than not. And so it is a lower standard of evidence in a criminal case, and that is a big difference. So what the board has to prove is that the incident happened by a preponderance of the evidence. So that is the standard that we have to move forward. I think that's important because in the criminal realm, you're dealing with loss of liberty, and that's not something that we're dealing with at all here. And there's a range of appropriate consequences that the hearing examiner, which functions as kind of like our judge, and then later the board members themselves, when they decide what's an appropriate disposition for the cases, it could be education. We can start with a caution letter, and then there are sometimes when there is a serious public safety concern where we do have to act on that license, and that could look like suspension of the license with classes or some kind of supervision. It could be loss of the license. So there is an entire range of appropriate penalties that we look at in these cases. And I think one of the other things I'd want to mention is that preponderance standard. That's down the road. So when a complaint first comes to the board, we do not need proof. We just need, for example, if it's a provider, another provider who has witnessed or has knowledge, we just need that report. Okay, so the duty is not to investigate. The duty is simply to report what you have seen or heard. And you don't even need to necessarily believe it or be able to vouch. You just need to pass that on to us. So that's the duty for the licensees. And then as a patient, Again, you just need to share what happened. So I don't want at all people in Ohio to feel like, oh, I need to make my case. No, you just need to tell us what happened and what your experience was.
It's really powerful to tell what happened and to be able to share in your own words with the board what you feel was wrong in the situation. I think that hopefully is a relief to someone who may have gone through something or who, is struggling with an idea of reporting without having the proof that may be in their head or they've seen on TV or something of that nature. So I appreciate you clarifying that. I think it just reemphasizes the point that it's crucial for you to file a complaint and let us figure out if we can bring a case forward. That is our responsibility. We're just asking you to provide us with the information. We'll be right back after this short break.
Do you have a disability? Do you want a job? Opportunities for Ohioans with disabilities can help. Visit oodworks.com to find out if OOD services are a good fit for you.
What does the medical board have in common with turkey legs, horse shows, and amusement park rides? Well, we will all be at the 2024 Ohio State Fair this summer from July 24th through August 4th. Stop by our booth, number 3011, in the Bricker Hall Marketplace to chat with a board representative and take home some cool swag. We can't wait to see you there.
Welcome back, Ohio. I'm talking to our chief of the sexual misconduct unit about sexual misconduct. Rachel, one of the reasons we're covering this topic is because of the range of behaviors that are considered sexual misconduct under board rule. I know throughout the years, sometimes different language has been used, and in the last probably 3 to 4 to 5 years, we've been much more specific as we cite individuals and as we are describing the situations taking place. So some of these behaviors are recognizable crimes and things that have to, of course, be reported to police, but others seem more subtle. How can patients know when behavior crosses the line from this is uncomfortable into actual misconduct with the board?
That is a really good question, Jerica. Thank you for posing that. So what I would encourage anyone who's listening to this is to trust your gut. So sexual misconduct is defined in the Ohio Administrative Code through the eyes of the patient. And what I mean by that is that it's defined as expression of thoughts, feelings, or gestures that are sexual or, and this is important, reasonably may be construed by a patient as sexual. So that means it's the viewpoint of the patient. So if you are going into an exam and there is touching or comments that feel uncomfortable to you, trust yourself.
I'm, again, so very happy that you're explicitly calling that out, because that means it doesn't have to be something that the police have to be involved with. It doesn't have to be something that is in violation of state or federal law. This could be something like, again, asking about a sexual preference, asking about bodies, or something that has nothing to do with the clinical care that's being provided. And I think that is so important for people to understand, because those lines get blurry. And I think we're going to be talking about cases in the next episode, but I think those are the areas where someone can push the boundary and blur lines. And especially if someone doesn't know what to expect from a situation, they may find themselves being taken advantage of, but not feeling like they are empowered to do something, or feeling like this is not important enough or serious enough for me to report it to someone.
I think it's important just to think, and I was speaking just now more in like the context of a physician, but this also applies to licensed massage therapy appointments. And so if you go into a massage therapy appointment and there is not sufficient draping, or the draping is too low, or there is some skin to skin contact on during a glute massage, or if it gets into the breast region or upper thighs. And a lot of times there might be a patient experience, which is, I think this is not right, but I don't know. I think this is not right, but I don't know. And that's where I would just encourage you to trust yourself. And then at that point, there is no right way to respond to trauma. So I really want to be careful and not blame any response, because there is a wide range of ways that people respond. I would say the typical way people respond is by freezing and saying nothing and just trying to get through the appointment. That would be typical. But what I would love to also encourage people is to advocate for yourself if you're comfortable. You can ask questions. Why are you doing this? What are my options? I decline this procedure. I would like a chaperone. I would like this to stop. And so I really do, even though I want to say that there's no right way to respond to an assault, I do just want to encourage people to use their voices as much as possible, because you can always ask for something to stop, to change, to ask why, and that can be a way to feel very empowered going into these appointments.
Yeah, that dialogue seems key, because I think we've seen cases where, especially someone who may be younger or we've never had a certain kind of exam before, so they don't even know what to expect. Like, maybe this is something that just comes along with, this awkward kind of procedure we're doing right now. And so it probably is just normal, and I'll just dismiss it. I won't, raise any alarms or anything. So I really appreciate you pointing out the fact that you can ask questions, and providers should be willing to explain, this is why I'm doing this. This is what this means. And even beforehand, I think kind of provide some expectations for that patient. That's an important part of providing good care.
Yeah, patient communication is key. And we share that on the provider side of things. That's something that we share a lot, which is there may, if a provider could take an extra second to say, and now I'm going to do this and this is why, and now I'm going to do this and this is why, that can take away, or that can provide some context. In some of the cases in which it is medically appropriate but confusing, that can really help patients feel safe and to understand the care that they're being given.
So talking about these kinds of issues can seem a little overwhelming. I know this is your bread and butter and what you do every day, but to the regular person, it sounds like a lot, right? Should patients be fearful of providers with this information?
No. I mean, in my experience, I do this every day, but do I neglect my medical care? No. Do I send my children to the doctor? Yes. And I think it's really important to understand that this does happen, but providers are, by and large, by vast majority, there to serve, there to do good, not to do harm. And just to put this in context, it's difficult to quantify how often this happens, largely because of the barriers to disclosure that I shared before. But I recently have read an article. It's a 2022 article. Journal article that looked at the national database that discloses sexual misconduct reports, and 10 out of 100,000 providers annually was the number that they came up with. And so this is not a common occurrence. And also, when you hear that number, taken with a grain, because it isn't a rock solid number, these journals and institutions have a difficult time quantifying it. Remember, there's a whole range of conduct. So it isn't just the most severe. It could also be, I wasn't offered appropriate draping. It could be something that is, it is a technical sexual misconduct violation, at least here in Ohio, but it isn't necessarily as bad as you might be thinking. But no, absolutely not. One of the things that is an unfortunate side effect to a negative appointment is commonly I will hear victims say, I stopped going to the doctor. And I think that is something that we absolutely need to make sure that we're not compromising medical care based off of this. And so still seeking out the care that you need from a provider who you feel comfortable with. And then moving forward, making a complaint if there was an appointment that wasn't comfortable.
So I feel like I have to bring this up before we wrap up today's conversation. Most of this conversation has been geared towards, again, a provider who is predatory in nature or trying to take advantage of a patient. But we know also that there's sometimes patients who are seeking out certain behavior. And we also educate our providers to make sure they're documenting information like that and being very clear, because I think, again, you have to let go of everything you've seen on Grey's Anatomy and ER. You cannot have a romantic or sexual relationship with your doctor. I know that might be shocking to hear. And not just your doctor, anyone that we license, dietitian, a massage therapist, physician assistant, any of our licensees, that is inappropriate. And I think that's an important thing to note. Attraction could happen, that's kind of normal. We're humans. But even consensual behavior is considered sexual misconduct with the state medical board.
Jerica, that is an excellent point. And so one of the things is the way that sexual interaction, which is that most severe kind of sexual misconduct here in Ohio, is defined. It doesn't matter whether the patient initiated it, consented to it, or participated in it. It absolutely is prohibited. And sometimes I have run into providers who aren't aware of that. If there is a patient, and I've had fact patterns like this, who comes on to the provider, there could be a termination immediately. And by letter is helpful, so that we have that in writing. And then if there is a massage therapy appointment that starts to go sideways and perhaps the client is requesting something that is not appropriate, that session should be terminated immediately. And that's really for the protection of the provider in that instance.
We've talked about the fact that, by and large, most of our providers are competent and safe and have their patient's best interest in mind and at heart. But these things do happen. If a patient or a family member or a friend or anyone really who has knowledge of or has witnessed some kind of behavior like this experiences, a situation where they feel like sexual misconduct, and again, not just sexual misconduct, any kind of misconduct by a provider has occurred, what should they do?
What they can do is make a report to the board, and that can be anonymous. They can give their name or not give their name. That's up to them. And that can be done online through a very simple and easy to use complaint form. There is also an email that you can write if you prefer to send an email. And there's also a phone line where you can call and leave a voicemail. And all of those are going to serve the same purpose of opening a complaint that will come through our process. It will be triaged. It will be sent to our investigators, to these specialized sexual misconduct investigators. And that's the point at which we would work together as a team right from the outset on these fact patterns, deciding what should be done next based on a case-by-case basis. So absolutely, I would encourage anyone who has any information to make a report. And don't worry if there's a duplicate. That's okay. That happens all the time. We can get the information that we need and move forward and see if this is something that we can pursue and take action on.
Awesome. And just to reiterate, our website is med.ohio.gov. I will leave information in the show notes so you can see exactly what that link is to file a complaint on our website. And like Rachel said, it's super simple. We really just want to hear from you and understand what happened. So now that we have laid the groundwork, you can begin to understand the kinds of situations that come before the board, specifically when it comes to sexual misconduct. The board knows sexual misconduct between a licensee and a patient is never diagnostic or therapeutic. Yes, that is actually in our rules. At the end of the day, it comes down to trust. And healthcare providers are entrusted with patients when they are sick or injured or vulnerable. And when sexual misconduct takes place, no matter the circumstance, trust is eroded. And we want to make sure that we are able to preserve that trust. That's all we have time for today, but tune into our next episode where for the first time we'll be looking at the details of past board cases, specifically one case involving sexual misconduct, and really unpacking the details of it and understanding how it could happen and what happens when the board sees something like that. You don't want to miss this. And again, Rachel, thank you so very much for your time today.
Thanks, Jerica.
Thank you for listening to this episode of MedBoard Pulse from the State Medical Board. A special thanks to our Sexual Misconduct Unit Chief, Rachel Lang. Subscribe today to hear our episodes right away. For more information about the Medical Board, visit med.ohio.gov. You can also email questions or comments at communications@med.ohio.gov. And remember, the more you listen, the more you'll learn, and the more you'll share.